Hello everybody, it's Apostle Tom Hamon. I just want to talk to you a little bit about where we are right now. Yes, we walked through 2020. It's been quite a year. And I believe the key for every season that we walk through, whether we feel like it's a great one or a difficult one, is to understand what God is saying. In other words, to know the word of the Lord. In fact, I believe receiving the word of the Lord is what keeps us seeing things from God's perspective. I felt like at the beginning of 2020, God says, I'm going to begin to teach my church how to see things from my perspective more than ever before. It's easy to get caught up in the news of the day, to get caught up in all the things that are going right or wrong or in between and the things that concern us. And those are real and we do want to understand them, but we always want to rise up and say, but God, how do you see what is taking place? And so hearing what God has to say is really what shifts us into the right mode of operation so that we can work with heaven, work with one another, and accomplish God's will in the earth. And I felt like for 2021, God was saying, we're going to learn how to run in 2021 more than ever before. Now, what does that mean? Learn how to run. Well, I believe one of the things that God began to say to us, 2020, you kind of felt like you were stuck in the starter's block. You kind of were stuck waiting, wondering what's going to happen next. But I believe God was doing some things in us as much as for us in 2020. And we had to walk through that difficult time and we had to kind of be shut down and locked down a little bit. But it was kind of like actually God was putting the church in the starter's block and he was waiting to hit that gun and begin to say it's time to run. And so we have to be prepared to move with God in this season. And one of the things I believe God is saying for us in this time is that we are called to run to the battle. I remember in 1 Samuel 17, when David is facing Goliath, you remember all the cowering of the armies of God and all the intimidation from Goliath and all the enemy's plans to bring the church into captivity. And it looked like it was going to work, except for David showing up on the scene. And he rose up and he began to say, I believe God can use me to make a difference. And he says, and I think it's verse 47, he makes a declaration that says, and all the assembly will know from this day forward that God does not save with sword or spear or with natural power, but he will be the one, the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into my hands. And then it says, as the Philistine or the army began to creep toward him, he didn't wait and say, what are they going to do? He ran and hurried toward the battle. And so I really believe that's what the church is called to do, not to just hunker down and try to play it safe or just try to wonder what's going to take place. No, it's time to run to the battle. How do you run to the battle? Well, there's so many ways we have to understand about the weapons of our war. We have to understand the full armor of God. We got to understand the plans and strategies of heaven. The prophetic is always tied to warfare in the earth. And so God speaks his word. He trumpets his sounds. It says, how shall the church mobilize or the people of God move if they don't hear the trumpet sound, the sound of war? And so that's part of God's plan for the church, is the prophets will begin to mobilize the church to know how to operate rightly in the earth. And so, for the first time in hearing God for a new year, I actually felt the Lord say, go and look up the Strong's number in the Hebrew to see what it says for the number 2021. And so I actually looked at that. And in the Hebrew, it's the word Hatson, and it's a unique word that's only used once, but it actually means this. It means to be sharp, to be strong as a weapon of war. And it also refers to like a chariot of war. And so, I just said, well, okay, let's look in the New Testament. Let's see what, in the Greek, what it says in 2021. And you know what it is a word in the Greek called epikario, and it literally means this, to take it into your hand, to take it into hand. And so here, if you take these two meanings and you feel like, well, God's speaking to me out of this, he's saying, I'm going to release weapons of war that are going to be strong. It's time to be sharp and strong and ready to run to the battle. But I also need for you to take it in your hand. And so as you put it in your hand, then you say, okay, God, I'm going to go out, like he said to Joshua, and I'm going to fight with all of my might. But then what happens? When we do our part, God can do his part. When we fight and mobilize, then God fights for us. And I believe that's what's going to take place in this hour. If you think about David's situation, it looked hopeless. It looked like a situation he could never win. Too strong. Goliath was too ugly. He was too experienced. He had too much going for him. It was just too big. It felt like to fail or fall. And yet David prophesied back to him, and then God began to fight and everything turned around. So I believe that God's got something in mind for us that's amazing. We serve the God of the turnaround. He is a mighty man of war, and we're going to fight with him to accomplish his purposes in the earth. The Lord bless you. 2021, run to the battle.